This is Mike Hattery from Everybody Hates Cleveland, and I'm rolling out another EHC podcast today with August Fagerstrom from Fangraphs. We're really thankful for his time. Thanks for coming aboard. How you doing, August?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So the Indians, I guess we're going to kind of lay out this season and some expectations. But the first question is following a decision about the back end of the rotation, keeping 13 pitchers, most notably Bauer in the bullpen. Is this sort of how you thought the rotation would shake out, or are you surprised?
Definitely a few months ago, it did not seem like this would be the case. But as the spring's gone on, I think it became more and more likely that this was going to happen. And it had actually gotten to the point where over the last week or so, I felt pretty confident that this would be the way that things shook out. I think it's interesting. It seemed like it really shocked a lot of people. Which, again, the assumption, I think, throughout the entire offseason was that Bauer would be in the rotation alongside Tomlin and that Cody would either be in AAA or maybe the bullpen, but probably AAA. But I think that that's kind of interesting because the Indians actually didn't change anything from last year. Trevor Bauer lost his job to Cody Anderson in September. He didn't just lose it yesterday. He lost it months ago. So I think it's kind of interesting that, really the Indians didn't change anything. They're just going with the rotation they had at the end of last season. So I think that when you view it through that lens, it's a little surprising how surprised everyone else was, I think.
That's definitely a fair point that I think gets a little consideration, and certainly from me. I guess my next question is what this means for Bauer moving forward. Obviously, a team is going to need more than 5 starters. They're going to probably rely on 8 or 9 this season, and Bauer looks to be used heavily. But is there something in here with Bauer in the back end of the bullpen that makes a lot of sense in terms of sustained velocity and how his stuff might be able to play out?
Right, and to your point, General Manager Chris Antonetti said when they announced this decision that, Trevor is going to play a big role in this team and that he's certainly going to make, a handful, if not many more, impact starts for this team. I think what it boils down to is Josh Tomlin, when he rejoined the rotation last year, pitched great. He was striking out batters unlike he ever had before. He's had a Cliff Lee-esque walk rate. He still gives up a lot of homers, but when you don't walk anyone and you don't put anyone on base, he seems to manage contact pretty well. If the only thing that you ever give up is home runs, that's a lot of solo homers, you can live with it. And he pitched very well. He earned himself an extension. Cody Anderson pitched well last year, even though the peripherals weren't quite there. He got a ton of ground balls. He managed contact well. He's got very good command. And then he added a bunch of muscle in the offseason, and he's throwing like 95 now. And if 95 means that he can miss bats, then you've got a pitcher who already had good command and got ground balls who might now miss bats. And those are the 3 things you look for in a pitcher. So he's very interesting. And then Bauer also added velocity in the offseason, but it's just such a struggle with him because he's got the kind of arm where it's a shame to have him in the bullpen. And I'm sure the Indians struggle with this because if Trevor Bauer could get through a lineup 3 times, he could throw 210 innings a year, and that's such a valuable thing to have. But my assumption is that with the fact that Tomlin basically earned his spot in the second half last year, Cody earned his spot with the increased velocity in his showing in spring training, and that even though Trevor increased his velocity too, my assumption is that they just don't think that he'll be able to, despite how durable and rubber his arm is and how much value he could have, if he were to throw 200 innings in the season. I think that they don't believe that he has the command to get through a lineup, pitch 6 and 7 innings, often to the point where he could throw 200 innings. And if Trevor Bauer cannot give you 200 innings, then he's not as valuable as some of these other guys because 200 league average innings, which is to this point all Bauer's proven that he can throw is about league average type stuff. 200 league average innings has its value. If he can only throw 170 because of his command problems, then like you mentioned, he's probably better off in the bullpen because his stuff can play up. He's been sitting, I think, 96 this spring. It's not unfathomable to think he could sit 97, 98 in the pen. And, he doesn't have to go through a lineup 2 or 3 times. The pitch count doesn't matter when you're in a bullpen. So I think that it just kind of worked out to, until Bauer proves that he can throw 6, 7 innings regularly and can actually put his rubber arm to use, then the other 2 guys just deserve the spot more.
So interesting to me is usage with Bauer in the bullpen. Do you think we're going to see him used as Tomlin was, as this sort of pivot guy who picks up innings in the 4-5, or could we see him transition pretty quickly to someone who's pitching one, maybe two innings, but very stuff reliant?
And that's a really interesting question, and I don't think the Indians probably even know that. I know that either Francona or Antonetti at that same press conference when they announced the move, they mentioned something to the effect of, Trevor will settle into a role. They're not defining anything yet. He'll figure it out. I would guess that a lot of it, interestingly enough, probably depends on how Jeff Manship looks, because I think Manship last year kind of started out. I think ideally what the Indians probably want is that Bauer has Manship's, which is such a strange thing to say, has Manship's kind of ascension through the bullpen last year, where he has experience as a starter. He can throw a couple innings. They already have a few guys slated into those back end innings. And Manship at the start last year, when he was first in the bullpen, was kind of that fifth, sixth inning, two inning at a time guy. And then as he got more and more dominant, they started giving him more and more high leverage innings. And I would guess that right now your high leverage guys are still obviously Allen in the ninth, probably Sean McAllister in the seventh and eighth, and then probably the next guy in the pecking order right now is Manship. So I would guess probably that Bauer starts out as that, like you said, Josh Tomlin, last year's Manship kind of guy, where he's the first guy out of the bullpen, can throw a couple innings and kind of bridge that gap to your high leverage guys. But it would not surprise me at all if Bauer ends up being a weapon out of the bullpen, which I think that there's little reason to believe that he can't be. He's a league average-ish starter. I think almost any league average starter, when they can go all out for an inning or two, will be a plus weapon in the bullpen. So I see no reason to believe why Bauer won't be good in the bullpen. And as long as that's the case, I think that as time will go on, he'll probably force his way into more higher leverage innings. But I wouldn't be surprised if at the start, even guys like Manship, Sean McAllister are ahead of him in the high leverage relief inning pecking order.
So in terms of Bauer, what do we think if we want to go a different route with Bauer, if the organization is frustrated with Bauer? I know we see Francona quotes, which are sort of, we don't really care about the velocity. We know Trevor does, sort of these passive aggressive quotes at times, I suppose, even though I enjoy Francona. Is there any way Bauer gets dealt in the early season to address the outfield, especially after the Chisenhall injury has kind of reared itself and with the Brantley injury? Is that a possibility?
Well, first, I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that they've come out and said that, they don't care about the velocity. I think it's just they think that I think he's maybe a little too hung up in the velocity, and he's got other things that he needs to work on. I think Trevor believes that with more velocity, he can get by with some of his other flaws, and they might think that there's a different way for him to combat those flaws. So the velocity can only be viewed as a good thing, and I think that they would probably agree with that. I think that they're just a little that they're on different pages of how he should go about refining his game. To your point, though, or to your question, I've had a couple of people ask me that in the last couple of days, and if they were trying to move Bauer, which I think they probably were over the offseason, because they obviously think highly enough of Tomlin to give him the extension. I know that the organization thinks very highly of Michael Clevenger, and obviously, they probably thought at least somewhat highly of Cody Anderson to end last season, and then as the offseason progressed and they saw the strides he was making, I'm sure that their impression of him raised too. So I think as all of that went on, I'm sure that they tried to move Bauer in the offseason and they just were not able to find a suitor. And I think if they were still trying to move him, or if they felt like they could move him, this would be a very odd choice to move him to the bullpen, because by moving him to the bullpen, you're coming out and saying, it's an indictment on him. Whether or not they say that, which they all said yesterday, this is an indictment on Trevor. This is just, a positive indictment on how good Cody and Tomlin have been. This does not look good for Trevor Bauer. And so if they're engaged in talks with him right now to trade him, then it would make no sense for them to put him in the bullpen. They would keep him in the rotation if they were confident that they could deal him soon. So I don't think he's going anywhere. I also think that he could be hard to trade just because of, what we were just talking about, that he is very steadfast in his ways of how he's going to train in the offseason, things he's going to work on, how he's going to pitch. And I think that I would be very shocked if there are not organizations in baseball that straight up just do not want Trevor Bauer, would not trade Trevor Bauer, would not acquire Trevor Bauer. And so I think that he's a difficult person to move for those reasons. So I think that they just think that this is the best way for them to assemble a 25-man roster and to shake out the rotation And honestly, if someone gets dealt, I think it's more likely that someone like Anderson or Tomlin would be dealt, because I think that it would just be easier to move one of those guys as opposed to Bauer, who's, kind of divisive a little bit.
Certainly, I mean, they got him on a discount, almost a seeming discount with the Diamondbacks when they acquired him, when he was still had a lot more luster and shine to his credentials. But I guess I'll progress out of the Bauer conversation and ask you a little bit about the Central and how the Indians look moving forward. Projections have liked this team a lot. Obviously, they're critics of projections and how they sort of undervalue certain characteristics that people value in the Royals or think may sort of outlie the projections with the Royals, but they're very optimistic about the Indians. How optimistic are you in terms of where they finish?
I'm pretty optimistic. I think that we've been saying this for the last two years, I think, and it hasn't gone well for Cleveland, but I think for the third consecutive year that they have the most talent in this division. I think they've had the most talent of any team in this division the last 2 years too, and it hasn't panned out, so we'll see. But we have our staff predictions on Fangraphs coming out maybe today or in the next couple of days. I don't know. And I'm sure I'll get flack for it. I'm also not the only one doing this, but I've got the Royals missing the playoffs again this year. I've got the White Sox. I think I'm actually in the pretty severe minority. I actually like the White Sox quite a bit, and I have them winning the division. And I have the Indians making a wild card spot. Even though I think the Indians are a more talented team than the White Sox, I think between the Brantley injury, Chisenhall opening on the DL, Tyler Naquin being the center fielder and having never played regular season Major League Baseball before, guys like Marlon Byrd and Juan Uribe, who didn't get full spring trainings, I think it wouldn't be surprising if the Indians, as they have the last 2 years, got out to a slow start in April again. And so that's why I think even though they're probably the most talented team in the division, I'm not sold that over the course of 162 games they'll be the best team. And so I think that it'll be kind of the same thing we saw the last couple of years, where it wouldn't be at all surprising if they got off to a slow start. And then once guys build up, Brantley's healthy, Naquin's acclimated to MLB, Bird and Uribe get their cuts in, that this team looks a lot more like the second half team last year. It's just a matter of getting to that point earlier than they did last year. But yeah, I mean, I think that the AL is up for grabs, and that the Indians, maybe outside of the Astros, have as much talent as anyone in the league.
I guess a question, there was a really interesting piece yesterday or 2 days before on Fangraphs with the bullpen rankings. And one of the sort of hypotheses has been that the Royals bullpen has sort of, its dominance in the late innings has allowed them to sort of outproduce projections and other systems that evaluate and sort of avoid some cluster luck issues. The bullpen looks significantly weaker. Is that sort of an issue why you have the Royals outside of the playoffs, or at least it looks a step weaker?
It's actually not. I think the bullpen is at least comparable to the last 2 years. I mean, the bar was set so high. I think it would be unreasonable to expect that they even come close. Or not, I guess that's a little too harsh. It would be unreasonable to expect that they will replicate the last 2 years, because it's been completely insane. I think the projections just really struggle with bullpens, and to be quite honest, even though it's, I write for Fangraphs and they host these projections, I don't really look at bullpen projections. Relievers are so volatile to begin with that it's so hard to predict what's going to happen. And I also just don't think that the projections fully understand what to do with high leverage innings, and more specifically elite production in high leverage innings, and how important that is to a team's success, because I think the projections look at that and they view it as like a clutch type thing, which is not repeatable. But if you've got a dominant guy back there and he's doing these things that seem unrepeatable in the ninth inning time and time again, you'll win more one-run games than usual, and you'll beat your base runs record and things like that. So I just think that maybe the projection models are not sophisticated enough to fully grasp. And I can't wait to see what happens with the Yankees this year and their base runs record and their bullpen performance, because if any team was going to truly show that projections just can't do bullpens, it would be this year's Yankees. But no, I'm down on the Royals because their starting rotation looks horrible. And the offense, it doesn't look like anything more than like a league average-ish offense. I mean, it's good. It's good enough. It's good enough to get into the playoffs if you had good pitching all around, but I don't think the Royals have good pitching all around. I think they've got good pitching after the starter leaves the game, and I think when the starter leaves the game more often than not this year, the Royals are going to be in a disadvantageous spot because, I mean, their opening day starter is Edison Volquez, who I don't think had above league average ground ball, strikeout, or walk figures last year. Ian Kennedy had allowed the highest OPS in baseball llast year. Yordano Ventura is still, I think, living more off of stuff than actual production. Chris Medlin, I don't know how many innings he can throw. I mean, it's just there's no one certain in that rotation. And there's also, to me at least, very little upside. I mean, I guess Ventura has upside, but I can't see who takes a step forward in that rotation beyond what we're seeing right now. And we've said this the last couple of years, but I just, until something changes in that rotation or some of those guys give me reason to believe that they're better than how I view them now, I just can't buy into those 5 guys carrying a 90-win playoff team for 162 games.
I guess the next question I have, as you're certainly the high guy on the White Sox, which you noted, is sort of the optimism on the White Sox. Obviously, the front of that rotation is probably under discussed compared to the Indians rotation. The Sale, Rodon, Quintana front end is absolutely outstanding. Obviously, you have Abreu there, but in terms of optimism regarding the White Sox, what's the reason you're the high guy?
What I like about the White Sox is, as you said, I mean, the front end of that rotation is so good. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely under-discussed. Obviously, Chris Sale's not under-discussed, but Jose Quintana might be the most underrated player in baseball. I think that he is I think that most people view him as like a number 3 who might be a number 2. I think he's a lot closer to being a true ace than a lot of people realize. I mean, if you just look at his numbers, how steady and how steadily good they've been since he came in the league, I think he's the fringiest ace that no one would ever consider to be an ace. I'm really high on Carlos Rodon. I think that he's going to be a number 2 type guy by the end of the year. I mean, you just don't see, I think, he's 20 or 21. You don't see 20 or 21-year-olds 1 year out of college come to the bigs and do what he did last year. I mean, he didn't set the world on fire, but he was an above average starter last year as a 20-year-old out of college. It's just so rare to see. I think he's going to make big strides this year. I'm also very high on Matt Latos. I wrote a post on him at Fangraphs earlier this year. I think they got an absolute steal in him. Pitching depth is certainly questionable. John Danks is not a good 5th starter, not even a 5th starter. They've got very little in the way of depth. That's definitely their biggest question mark, but I think that they had a really nice offseason in terms of patching up the holes, because that was what killed the White Sox last year. They had a very active offseason, but much like the Padres, they seemingly ignored like several pretty key positions, and they ended up having just major black holes across the diamond. And I think by doing things like getting Austin Jackson and Brett Lawrie and Todd Frazier and Jimmy Rollins and Alex Avila, I mean, they patched up all their holes. And I look across the entire lineup, really 1 to 9, there doesn't seem to me to be a position that is just a black hole. They improved the outfield defense, even though it's not that good anymore. But Austin Jackson's a fine center fielder. Adam Eaton, who is not a good center fielder, should be a plus in a corner. I just think that they patched up their holes. They've got enough ace material in the front of that rotation to be good, and the bullpen is fine too. I mean, it's not like the Yankees or the Royals, but they have an above average bullpen, at least in my opinion. And I just think that they're solid enough across the board that pitching can carry them without having the black holes of the lineup drag it down like it did last year.
All right, I'm gonna reflect back to the Indians. I guess, who is the guy who you think is going to make the biggest leap this year? Is it Danny Salazar? Is it someone else? Who is the Indian who you think sort of breaks out or makes another leap in terms of production?
I am really high on Danny Salazar. I think that he will take I guess I don't know what the comp would be, like a Garrett Cole type leap, where, I mean, obviously no one was sleeping on Garrett Cole to begin last season. Everyone knew that he was a really good, young, talented pitcher, but Garrett Cole is now viewed as an ace across baseball, I think. And I think that at the end of this year, Salazar will too. I mean, just with just being around the team for each of the last 2 years, the way that Salazar approached pitching last year was night and day, 100% different from the year that he approached pitching the year before. You hear the cliche about throwers, not pitchers. And before last season, Danny Salazar absolutely was a thrower, not just on the mound, but the way that he thought about pitching. I mean, he thought he could just blow people away, and he could to a certain extent, but you're not going to make any progress doing that. And last year, talking to Mickey Callaway, he started buying into some, advanced pitching stats and stuff. He started looking at Brooks baseball and thinking about his spin rate and things like that. He added a curveball. He added a sinker. He started throwing his fastball low in the zone. He understood that he needed to get ground balls to couple with his strikeouts to be a complete pitcher. And he had one of the largest increases in ground ball rate of anyone in baseball last year. He didn't really give away any strikeouts. I think he just gets what it takes to be a well-rounded pitcher, not just a strikeout artist now. And I think that we're going to continue seeing that improvement this year. But more than that, I think that because I think that's kind of an easy answer. I think Michael Clevenger is the guy that really surprises people. I think he's going to be the first guy out of the minors when they need a new pitcher. Like I said, I know just from things that I've heard out of spring training that the organization is super high on him. It would be hard not to be after what he did in the minor leagues last year. He throws hard. He gets strikeouts, ground balls, doesn't walk people. I mean, he's kind of the same mold of the pitchers the Indians have been developing these last few years. And I think we're going to see him sometime this year, probably around the All-Star break if they need a pitcher, maybe even earlier. And I see no reason why he will not translate to a quality pitcher. And if, I wouldn't be surprised if he was their solid number 4 by the end of the year who has stuff better than a number 4 pitcher.
So a question for me is there a point at which Clevenger sort of jumps Bauer for starts? If we have sustained health through May, which with a starting rotation is not something that you can ever guarantee or really even rely on, but is there a point at which they just sort of commit to turning Bauer into a back end guy and Clevenger becomes the next guy up before even sort of converting Bauer back from the bullpen?
Yeah, and I think I didn't necessarily misspeak, but I might have been misleading when I said that Clevenger is the first guy up out of the minors. I still think that Bauer is the next guy that gets a crack at the rotation. Like, for instance, if Tomlin or Anderson were to either get hurt or underperform, they would still go to Bauer before Clevenger, I think. But I can't imagine that Bauer's leash is too long. And, again, I know that they want to get Clevenger up here, or at least that they don't want to hold him down. They're excited to see what he can do at the big league level. So it would be hard for me, I guess, aside from him, running like a 1 ERA and FIP in AAA while Bauer gets bombed in the bullpen. I mean, if they're both on the extreme ends of the spectrum like that, it's possible that maybe Clevenger could get the call, or could get the starts before Bauer. But I'd be pretty surprised if Bauer didn't get the first crack. But it also would not be surprising to me if by the end of the year, Clevenger had usurped Bauer on the depth chart. It wouldn't surprise me if he had usurped all but the top 3 guys in the depth chart by the end of the year, to be honest.
So that leads to the sort of I have to ask about Anderson, and I know Jeff Sullivan published a really exciting post for most Indians fans, which sort of loosely comped Anderson to Matt Harvey, with people sort of obsessing about that. The secondary stuff is not quite there yet, it seems like, with Anderson. How real do you think the jump is for Anderson with this velocity? Does it look like a 3.7 FIP, 3.8 FIP? Does it look better than that? What's the possible jump you can envision for Anderson with this velo spike?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, I think I was definitely one of the Anderson critics last year when everyone was so excited about his 2 whatever ERA. I think it ended up being in the low 3s. I had written a post for MLB.com where, like you mentioned, I looked at some of his secondary offerings. I looked at the fastball too, but I was mostly focusing on the secondary stuff, looking at the velocity and the movement and the spin rate and things like that, and trying to find comparable pitches. And like none of his pitch comps were at all intriguing. It was I can't remember all the names now, but I know like Nick Martinez from Texas, who is like a 7th or 8th starter, comped very well to all of his pitches. Like Kyle Gibson, who I think is pretty interesting, but is a back end type guy for now, was in there. I mean, it was not overpowering guys. And so even though Anderson was getting these really good results, just looking at the stuff, it didn't match up. Something had to give. And obviously he wasn't striking anyone out either. So you didn't really need any like fancy pitch comp type studies to see that like he just didn't have overpowering stuff. So I've been the low man on Anderson, I think, most of the time. But looking at, Sullivan's post kind of sold me. And, it's not as much the post. I mean, he added 3 miles an hour in velocity. I mean, guys throwing 95 now. That should sell most people, I think. Definitely we'll need to see what happens with the secondary stuff. I do think the changeup has the potential to be a plus pitch. He'll need a third one. But I guess I'm kind of high on Anderson now. I mean, I did a pretty quick 180. I mean, I guess taking your fastball from 92 to 95 will do that. because he's got great command. He's not going to walk people. It seems like maybe it's deception, or I don't know what it is, but it seems like, and it's way too early to tell definitively, but the indications seem to be there that he might be a contact manager. I mean, he definitely gets ground balls, but he might get like weak contact too. And I mean, I guess those are the three things you look for. You look for in a pitcher, right? Or like walks, weak contact, and strikeouts. The strikeouts are by far the most important one. So if you've got ground balls and walks, but not the strikeouts, it's not always going to work. But Anderson's got, I mean, he's 2/3 of the way there. And if 95 can, be the missing piece of the puzzle for him to get whiffs, then you've got a pretty complete pitcher. So I'm kind of buying into it. I mean, I could see like like you were saying, a mid to high, like we'll say a high threes FIP, which I think if his contact management skills that he hinted at last year are real, then maybe, his 3.8 FIP turns into a 3.6 ERA or something like that. I mean, I don't think he's going to be an ace. Obviously, the Matt Harvey comp was a little more for fun, a little more, just enticing than it is actually saying like this guy's going to be Matt Harvey. So I mean, I think that anyone that's expecting him to be a frontline type starter is probably getting a little ahead of themselves. But I wasn't sold last year that he was a big league pitcher, and I'm kind of on the side now that he could be a solid number 4 on this team. He's got pretty encouraging stuff right now.
Yeah, I guess I was certainly at least following your camp last year. I mean, we saw a ground ball rate that was good, but it wasn't, sort of exceptional or great. It's in the 40% range, a little over, and I think you'd like to see it pushing 50. And then the K rate was in the low 4s, and his minor K rates aren't great either in terms of per 9. I'm not using K percentage, obviously, but what does it have to get to for him in terms of K percentage or K per 9 for him to be something substantive? Just right around 7 because of his good walk rate and ground ball rate, or does it have to get a little higher?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that right, he does not need to like overpower people and be this like huge strikeout pitcher. He was just, he was striking out like Mark Burley levels of batters last year. And unless you're basically Mark Burley and only Mark Burley, you just can't, like, it doesn't work. You can't do that. And so, and the issue last year was that I didn't see any reason to believe that he could make that jump. And now we've got reason to believe that he could make that jump. And I don't think that he needs to add much. I think, like you're saying, if he can strike out 7 batters an inning, I think with the fact that he gets enough ground balls and he doesn't walk that many people, I think that could be enough, again, to be a serviceable mid to back end type starter. I still don't think he has super high upside, but just to even say that I can see a back end starter is a lot higher than I was last year, and I didn't even see a big league pitcher. So yeah, I mean, to be a quality starter on a playoff team, 4th or 5th guy, I think that if he can just strike out a league average-ish number of batters, that'll probably be enough.
The next question is about center field and Tyler Naquin. Do you think he can post a 700 OPS and just at league average defense a little better out there? I mean, that's a 2-WAR player or a league average center fielder. Is that possible? How likely is that? It's a better question.
I think that that it's more likely that the OPS is lower than that and that the defense is better than like just average-ish. I think that he can be a true plus center fielder. I mean, he's not going to be like Kevin Kiermaier or even, like a Gold Glove type guy, but I think he can be like a +5 run type center fielder. He has an absolute cannon in center field. When I covered him in Akron, he showed pretty good range. I mean, it's not his strongest suit, but he at least has average range for a center fielder, if not better, and he has a super, super plus arm. So I think that he's going to make most of his value on defense. I'm really not that sold on the bat. I think that people are getting a little too wrapped up in what he did in spring training. If he's a league average hitter this year, I'll be pretty surprised. I think that he'll be, I guess I was going to say Abraham Almonte, but I guess he's not a great comp because I think he hit over his head last year too. I think he'll be what we thought Almonte would be before he surprised everybody. But I think the issue with Naquin is too that in the minor leagues he did not fare super well against left-handed pitching. So I think that he is not only a probably not even league average bat, but also one who probably cannot play every day. I think Naquin still has the future of a fourth or fifth outfielder type. He's certainly the best option the Indians have for center field, especially given his defense. I mean, to have like Rajai Davis out there who can't hit righties and also has questionable defense in center field, Naquin was definitely the best choice. I mean, he might be the only guy in the 40-man roster that can even play center field defense in the major league level. I'm not sure about that. I could be forgetting someone. I mean, I guess Michael Brantley, but that's not great either. So I think that he's a pretty obvious option for them. I just think that if fans are expecting like a league average bat, that they might be getting a little ahead of themselves. Naquin wasn't even supposed to be up this early. This is kind of just circumstance of how bad the Indians outfield is that he's here. So I think that they're kind of rolling with a fourth or fifth outfielder as their starting center fielder right now. But if the defense is as good as it should be, then I think that that's still a pretty serviceable player.
Last question. I guess you have them for a wild card spot, over under 86 wins.
That's funny because I think that's about it. I think like 87 is probably what I'd say. So I guess maybe over. But I think the AL Central is really interesting because I think all 5 of these teams are competitive. And I think they're going to beat up on one another enough that I don't think you're going to need 9. I mean, it's weird. It's going to be a really competitive division, but I also don't think it's going to be one where you need 90 wins because it's just going to be. I mean, there's no easy games in the division. I mean, even the Twins, who I think are probably the most slept on, or I guess just worst if you want to go that extreme with a team in the division. Like the Twins are a pretty good team, and they've got really interesting young players. So it's a tough division that that will make for probably it. It will probably make it difficult for a team to win 90 or 95 or so in this division. So, yeah, I think probably 86 or 87 in a wild card sounds about right to me.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much for coming on, August.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And that's it for the Everybody Hates Cleveland podcast. This is Mike Hattery and August Fagerstrom signing off.